So I've had the Sony A6500 for about a year now, and I've created a setup that has been really helpful for me in my day-to-day photography. I thought I would share my settings with you in hope that it will be helpful to you as well. So let's take a look at how we can customize this amazing camera. Okay, so let's jump into the menu of the Sony A6500. And first we'll go into camera settings number 1. And the first setting you see up there is extra fine. And that's extra fine in JPEG. And the reason I set it for that is because not all the features in this camera can be used in RAW, because RAW, when you shoot in RAW, you don't want the camera to change your image in any way, and some of these features really radically change your image and modify your image, and you don't want it to do that in RAW. So I set it in JPEG so we can see all the features in the camera. I normally set my quality at RAW, and I almost always shoot in RAW. Image size I have set at the highest image resolution you can get on this camera, 24 megapixels. The ratio is at 3:2, which is normal 35mm ratio. I have the long exposure, noise reduction turned to off. High ISO noise reduction I have on low. Color space, Adobe RGB, that's what I prefer. I do a lot of printing, and that's just a good color space for me. I don't mess with lens compensation. I don't know if you can notice it or not, but these 3 on top here are grayed out because I'm not in auto mode right now, and those are all about auto mode, and they have little slashes next to them. Drive mode right now is at single shooting, and you have a bunch of different drive modes that you can use. You can use single shooting, low, continuous high, continuous mid, continuous low. So you have 3 different settings for shooting at continuous shooting. You have a timer, it goes from 2 seconds to 10 seconds. All these different ones, self-timer, bracketing, just a bunch of different things that you can do. Mine is on single shot right now. Bracketing, you can bracket settings, you can decide if you want the self-timer during bracketing. You can change the bracketing order. I have it set at -2 stops, and then at the exposure the camera recommends, and then +2 stops. And that's how I set that up. Next is memory. And this is like if you want to set up the camera to do a certain type of shooting, like portrait shooting, or maybe sports shooting or something like that, you can set up, there's on the top here on the mode dial, there's a 1 and a 2, and then that's what these numbers are for. And you can set it up, this whole thing, and then you just switch to 1 and you start shooting sports, or you switch to 2 and you start shooting portraits, and you'll have your aperture and your mode, and everything will be set up for you, and you just have to switch to that number. So it's pretty handy to have. The next one, page 5, you have focus mode. Well, I have it on single shot autofocus, but there's quite a selection there too. You have autofocus, automatic autofocus, where it'll start out in single shot, it'll move into continuous autofocus. It'll start out in autofocus, and then it'll go into manual focus. And this is just straight manual focus. So you have some nice selections there. And next you have priority set and autofocus. I have it balanced emphasis. Priority set and autofocus continuous I have in balanced emphasis. And the other choices you had there were autofocus and release, where you put the emphasis on autofocus. It won't take the picture until the picture is completely in focus, and the other one is it'll just release it without it being in focus. And I have it in balanced. I think it's always good to be balanced in life. Focus area, I shoot on wide most of the time, but you can do center. There's what are some of the other ones? There's center, there's zone, there's center, there's center again, flexible spot. So you have quite a few different options there. I have it set on wide most of the time. Autofocus illuminator, I have set on auto. Center lock on autofocus is on off, but sometimes I use that, and you need to set up a button for that. Autofocus with shutter, I have set on, so when you push the shutter down, it automatically autofocuses. I don't do back button autofocus, especially on this camera. It's just not very convenient. Pre-autofocus I have set to off, which pre-autofocus means that your camera is constantly, when you have it on, it's constantly trying to focus wherever you point it. And I just feel like that's going to use a lot of battery power, and it's really not necessary. This camera has really fast autofocus. You don't need that. Autofocus, auto clear, I have on. Display continuous autofocus area, I have on. I like that too. Autofocus micro adjustment, I don't touch that. Exposure compensation, you can change your exposure compensation back and forth, and you can do that. Usually I do this with this the wheel here when I'm shooting. It's set up for that, and then just turn it either way and it'll change the compensation. ISO 100. Try to keep your ISO as low as possible all the time, because that gives you better images, gives you more higher quality images. I have autofocus minimum and single shot autofocus, because when you have it on auto ISO, the minimum it will go to, the shutter speed will be 1/60th of a second, because any slower than that, if you're shooting anything that's moving, is you're going to get a blurry picture, and sometimes you'll get a blurry picture anyway, but you get a better chance of it. Metering mode at multi right now. It has center autofocus, it has spot autofocus. I mean metering, so those work really well too. Spot metering, focus point. So if you're on spot metering, what it will do is wherever you put that focus point, it will meter on that spot to make sure that whatever you're focusing on is exposed right. Exposure step, you can either set your camera to go in a third of a stop or a half a stop when you change the exposure setting. AEL with shutter is auto. So when you push the shutter down, the exposure will come up. Flash mode, I have it in fill flash. Flash compensation is on 0 right now. Sometimes I'll go a little under just so I don't blow out what I'm trying to take a picture of. Usually it's people when I'm bringing up the flash for a little fill light. I have it set to account for ambient light only. I have red eye reduction set off. White balance on auto. I shoot in RAW 90% of the time, so I leave white balance on auto because I can always adjust the white balance in post. If I am shooting in JPEG, I do make sure that I set the white balance for the lighting that I'm in. Priority set and auto white balance is standard. Dynamic range optimizer and auto HDR I have set off because I don't want the camera making those decisions for me. Creative style I have in standard because I want my image to come off with as little adjustments made to it by the camera as possible, because I want to make all the adjustments to my camera, to my image I mean. I have picture effect off and picture profile off, which is, after what I just said, is pretty obvious why I would do that. Soft skin effect off. Focus magnifier, this is, you press that and you get this little square here, and if you're in manual focus, once you start manual focusing, I don't know if it'll do it here. No, won't do it. Once you start manual focusing, it will magnify that by like 100%. Whatever your focus, whatever you put that box on, and it just helps you to get a sharper focused, sharper picture when you're manual focusing. Focus magnifier time, I have no limit, so that I can take as much time as I want doing that. Autofocus magnifier I have on. Manual focus assist I have on. Peaking level I have at mid, and my peaking level color is red. There are 3 colors. You got red, yellow, and white for that, and that's just pretty much a personal preference. Number 14, and the last one on this section of the menu is smile and face detection, which I have turned on, which it really does a good job of recognizing faces. It has face registration, which what that does is you can register up to 10 faces, and say if you're at a wedding and you're shooting a wedding and you want to register the important people, the bride and the groom, the mom and the dad, whatever number you put them on, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the camera will focus on them in that priority. So if you put the bride as number 1, if she's in a group, the camera will focus on her, recognize her, and focus on her first. It's amazing what these cameras can do now. File format for shooting movies, I have at XAVC SHD. I have my recording setting at 60 frames per second at 50 megabits, is it? I forget what that is. But I know that's the setting it's supposed to be at. Auto drive speed I have at normal. Let me put this on, because you can't really get into that other one unless you have this on movie mode. There we go. And so now you see in here in that S&Q setting, you can set it to different modes functions. So you can set it to program auto or aperture priority or shutter priority. So you have different choices there. That's a whole nother video talking about video, because it's that's really I'm going to put it back to aperture priority, because the video in this is very involved, and the different settings are very involved, and I think I would have to do a video just on that if I was going to talk a lot about that, and I need to learn a lot more about it. I'm mostly a still photographer. Autofocus track sensing I have set at standard. Auto slow shutter is on, and that's if you are shooting video and you're in low light, it'll allow the camera to drop down to a slower shutter speed, like 1/30th of a second. Auto recording on, auto level display on. Wind noise reduction I have off, because you don't want that on, because it'll just filter out noise when it's windy, but if it's not windy, it'll filter out noise you don't want it to filter out. So, and you won't get as good a quality of sound. These are different settings for movies. Silent shooting I have off. E-front curtain shutter I have on. Allows the camera to work faster. I have release without shutter, without lens enabled in case I want to use a legacy lens with an adapter. You put a lens on there, it doesn't have any electronics, and if a camera will still fire. I have release without card disabled. Of course, you don't want your camera taking pictures if there's no card in there. Steady shot I have on almost all the time, unless I put my camera on a tripod. And steady shot settings there, I don't touch that. Zoom, this is a zoom for the, you can set that up to a button, the zoom, and then it has a clear image zoom, which is really good for video. I don't think it's a good thing to use for still photography, but it works really well for video. If you have, say, an 85mm lens, and you set that up, and it'll do clear image zoom up to 200%, so you can reach out to 160mm with an 85mm lens, and it does a really good job. Display button, okay, that's this right up here, and what this does is it decides you have a monitor, and you have the monitor and the finder, and what you do with that is you decide what kind of information you want displayed on your display when you hit this display button. So let's go back to here and here, and so like if I hit my display button, I get on this one I get a level and this little bit of information along the bottom, and then on the next one this gives me all my information that's happening on my camera, and then this one gives me all this information around here. So just different types of displays. I usually keep it here when I'm shooting most of the time, so it doesn't interfere with my view. Finder monitor, I have it set to manual and I have it set on monitor, and I'll talk to you about that in a second when I talked about the custom buttons and how have I set them up, and why I have that set up that way. Finder frame rate is 60 frames per second. It can do 60 or it can do 120. There isn't a big difference there, and you save a lot of battery power by putting it on 60. I have zebra off. I tried using that, but it just kind of annoys me and you constantly have these little lines in your picture, and it just bothers me, so I don't use it. I have the grid line set up for rule of thirds, and you have a few other choices for that. Exposure guide I have set to on, and what the exposure guide is when you when you turn this button to change to underexpose or overexpose, that's what that is. This right here is your exposure guide. It tells you how much you're underexposing or overexposing. Like I'm 2 stops under there, and I'm at 0 here, +3 there, and at 0 there. So, excuse me. So that's what that does. Live view display setting effect on, and why do I have that? Well, you just kind of saw it, but let's look at it again. The live view display setting is what it does is it shows you what's happening when you're changing the exposure. So when you're looking through the viewfinder or you're looking at the monitor, you can see what your adjustments are doing to your picture, and I love this. This is why I love this camera, and why I love the electronic viewfinder, because I can tell what my picture is going to look like before I press that shutter button. Where with DSLR, I would take pictures, and then all of a sudden I look down and I've taken 5 pictures and they're all blown out. That's really scary when it happens at a wedding or something. So, which it shouldn't happen, but even pros make mistakes sometimes. Custom key shoot. Now this is where you set up you customize your different function keys, and this is really a great feature of this camera. It has a lot of function keys. You can set up like 9 different function keys on this camera. And here's the custom key sheet. Now you have 2 buttons on top, which, you see my finger up there? Yeah, kind of. But there's 2 buttons on top. There's C1 and C2. Excuse me. And so you can set those up for if you want. I have them set up for my focus area and my focus mode. And then I have custom button 3, which I talked about how I had the monitors set up for manual for monitor. Because when you set it up like that, I could have put it for Finder either. Then you can set this up to toggle between Finder and monitor, and so you can. So if you're out shooting, and if you have it on auto, when you're not looking through the viewfinder, then this comes on, and when you're looking through the viewfinder, this comes off. But this is always on. But if you do this, okay, I'm going to start using the viewfinder, which I do most of the time during the day. You just hit this, and it turns the monitor off. And then if you want to look through the monitor, maybe look at your pictures or make some adjustments or settings, you just flip it on and it turns it back on again. So I really like the way that works. Yeah, okay. And then center button I have set to turn on the focus magnifier. The left button, which really isn't a button, it's the side of the wheel here, and it presses in. And I have that set up to go to drive mode, which is pretty much a default setting for the camera. And also on the right side, when you push the wheel on the right side, I have it set up for ISO, which is also a default setting. And then you go to the next one, and then the down button I have set up for monitor brightness, so I can change the monitor brightness. So sometimes in bright daylight, I want to look at my monitor, and you really have to kick up that brightness in order to be able to see, but I don't want it that bright all the time, so I want to be able to switch it back and forth when I'm looking at it. AEL button and autofocus manual focus button is this right up here, and when you switch this up to autofocus manual focus or down to AEL, this button serves a different function. So I have it set up for when I switch it down to AEL, I get my metering mode, and then I have it set up for when I switch it up to autofocus manual focus, I get eye autofocus. So when I'm shooting, I can just put my thumb back here and press on here, and I can get my eye autofocus and get those really sharp eyes when I'm taking portraits. Also on the bottom here you have the focus hold button, which is only on certain lenses. I did a review on the new Sony 85mm f1.8. It has a focus hold button on the side of the lens, and I set that up for eye autofocus, and it works really nicely when you're doing portraits. And that's only on certain lenses though that you have that button, but you can do it. So that's all the custom buttons, and then you're not done with customizing though. You've customized 9 different functions on buttons here, and then you can go down to this, which is the custom key No, then this is not the one I'm talking about. This is a custom key. This is for a playback menu, and I really don't even touch that. But the function menu set is what I'm talking about. You have those 9 buttons that you customize, and you can also get into this function menu set by just pressing this FN button when you're in normal shooting mode, and that gives you 6 different functions on each side of the custom function menu. I'll show you in a second. And so you have 12 different options, and you can use. I find I go in here and I change these somewhat every so often. I have picture effect, steady shot, face detection, dynamic range, and auto dynamic HDR. I have image size, center lock on autofocus, flash mode, flash compensation, white balance, silent shooting, quality, and creative style. Excuse me. So that's a really good setup because it's really like a quick menu like Canon has. Let me show you what that looks like. So you're shooting and you just hit this FN button, and it gives you all these items along the bottom, and you can change any of these items at any time, and it's really quick and fast to do. And the neat thing about this camera is, you say, well, you can't see that well in broad daylight, but you can just switch it over to your electronic viewfinder, and you can look at this and you can see it really well, and you can make all those adjustments. So I like that. But dial wheel, I leave those all pretty much the way they were set up with the original setup with the camera. Movie button I have set for always. In other words, anytime I push the movie button, it's over on the side of the camera here where my thumb is. I don't know if you can see it. Anytime I push that movie button, it'll start making a movie. You can also set it to movie mode only, and that means when you set the top dial on top to movie mode, that it will only, the movie button will only work when you set it to movie mode. And sometimes people like to do that because they say they accidentally hit that button, but it's kind of off to the side. Some people even complain that it's way too much out of the way. Wheel dial lock, I like this feature because sometimes I'll find I was in Israel a while back and I was walking around in the old city, and there's a lot of buildings that are just you're almost like in a valley of buildings, and I had my aperture set at f8, and that was good enough for the light with ISO 100. I looked down at my pictures and I realized that they were blurry. And I looked at my wheel and I realized that I had kicked my f-stop up to f22. So this function here is like, if you put for the wheel lock, is you press the FN button down for like 5 seconds and it will lock the wheel. Okay, and now I can turn this wheel all I want and it won't change anything, or I can turn this one up here, it won't change anything. But then if I hit that again and it unlocks it, and then I'm back in business as far as changing things again. So I really like that. Audio signals I have on. I like all the little beeps and stuff. That's personal taste. Wireless, I'm not going to talk a lot about this. I have it all pretty much turned off because I have it on airplane mode because I don't want my camera constantly searching for a wireless connection. When I do want it, I'll turn it on and then I'll do that. Bluetooth settings, you can pair it up with different devices. Application list, this is a whole nother video, I guess, because there's a whole lot of different applications you can download onto this camera and use for this camera. I'd like to do a video on that and do some research on that. I really haven't done a lot of that, and I'm not sure that very many of those are much use to anybody anyway. But this is your playback menu. This enlarges your images, this button right here. Specify printing, I've never printed off a camera, so I don't know what that's for. Monitor brightness, I have on manual, and I usually keep both my monitor and my EVF at +2 so I can see better. Finder color temperature, I leave that at 0. Camera display assist is off. Volume settings 15. Tile menu, I like having the tile menu, and that's this menu right here. I like being able to get to all the different features quickly. I like that. Mode dial guide, that every time you turn the mode dial, it gives you like a tutorial of what that mode dial does. Well, I don't really need that, so I turn that off. Delete, confirm, cancel first. Display quality standard, because you don't need it on high because there isn't a really big difference. I can't see a difference. Power save, start time 2 minutes. After 2 minutes the camera will turn itself off. Power off temperature is standard. That's for when you're doing video and the camera starts to heat up. And NTSC is the format for United States for video, and PAL is for Europe. It has a cleaning mode where if you hit this, it will shake the sensor and knock any dust off of it, any loose dust at least. Touch operation I have for panel and pad. Touchpad is vertical. When I have the camera vertical, it still works, it's still on. Touchpad area I have set for the whole screen because I shoot with my right eye. If you shoot with your left eye, you might want to change it to right half area or right quarter area, because you'll be setting your focus point with your nose if you don't. Demo mode off, of course. Remote control is off. I have that off because I have a wireless flash trigger, and you really have to turn that off in order for my wireless flash trigger to work. I don't know why. USB connection I have set to mass storage. USB's power supply on. Looks like we're getting to the end of this. English, of course. This is where you go to format your card. Remember that's location, the suitcase, page 6 on the top, because you want to format your card every time you erase your card. You don't want to erase it in a computer or anything like that. File name, you can set up your own little 3-character premise for your file name. I put it at A65 so I know all the images that I take on my A6500. Just a bunch of different folder options there. This is a version, and this is where you look to find out what firmware version your camera is at. This camera is up to date on its firmware. It's the lens, I don't know about it. I don't know if this lens will even take a firmware update. I have to check that out. But so yeah, that's it. That's all my settings on the Sony A6500. I hope this is helpful. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and if you did, go ahead and give me a like, and if you'd like to see more of my videos, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. And I'm working on making more content for my YouTube channel, and thanks so much for watching.